Okay, next we're going to talk about the grip and body posture. Okay, with the grip, there are three main principles that we want to use. First being friction. What I mean by friction is my placement of my hands on the gun. Right? I want to have as much coverage and contact on the gun as possible. Next, we have pressure. After my hands are in place, where do I actually apply the pressure into the frame of the gun? And then lastly, we have leverage. I use my body posture and hand positioning to build leverage into the gun to apply that leverage in the opposite direction of what the gun wants to do during recoil. First, we're going to talk about the primary hand on the gun and the placement. So if I take this gun, I take my primary hand, I want to grab the gun. I want the position of this gun to be in line with my forearm. All right? I want as much of my body behind the back strap of this gun as possible. All right? This is going to be somewhat dependent on your hand size, because if I am too in line and my fingers aren't long enough to get up and get a good contact on the trigger, then I can't do that. What we don't want is to be all the way to the side, where now I can get my finger in on the trigger, but I don't have any structure behind the gun, right? So we need to find a good balance. We want the gun as much in line with my forearm as possible while still being able to manipulate that trigger. So what happens with the gun when it goes off, right? When the gun goes off, the slide reciprocates back and the barrel goes up, right? So it recoils in this manner. What my hand is doing is creating a pivot point on the back of the gun, like this, right? If I was able to hold the gun like this and get my hand all the way up on the back plate, then that would be ideal, but we can't do that because the slide needs to reciprocate back, right? So I get as close as possible by coming all the way up on this back strap. Then I want to grip around the front end of this grip, pulling back, right? This position I get is the highest amount of friction and contact on the gun as possible. What we don't want is to be low on the grip. So now you can see that there is a gap right here between the web of my hand and the back strap. What that does, it creates a larger pivot point for more movement for the gun to do during recoil, as well as it's not as stable left and right. So all the way up, gripping around to the front of the grip, right? That's the friction on the primary hand. The pressure that we're going to apply after our hand is in the correct position is we want to pull back and down, right? Because as we saw before, on that pivot point, the front of the grip goes forward and up. So the counter pressure to forward and up is back and down. I want to pull into the front of the grip and apply pressure down. What we don't want to see is our whole lives, every time we go to grab something, right, we've always grabbed things like this, right? It's more of a hammer grip. If I was going to grab a hammer, I would grab it like this, right? The issue with that, when we start to apply all that pressure in our fingers and roll, right, as I do that, you can see that my trigger finger gets influenced. It's sympathetic because all my fingers are coordinated to work together. It pulls my trigger finger to the right. Right? We will see that movement in our sights as we're shooting. We don't want that. So instead of a hammer grip, we want a vice grip. I want to pull my fingers back into my palm and back into that structure of my forearm, just like that. So I'm applying that pressure in the middle of my fingers, not in my fingertips. So on the gun, what that looks like is I'm pulling right into the front of the grip this way. I'm not grabbing around like this into my fingertips, because once I grab around to this side of the grip, you guys can see that the muzzle starts to get pulled to the right. If I vice, it stays straight as much as possible. You'll always have movement, but we want to minimize it the best we can. So that pressure now is back and down. I'm pulling mainly with my pinky and my ring finger, not my middle finger. All right, I want to try to keep my middle finger loose to isolate my trigger finger as much as possible to have less influence on the position of my muzzle when I pull the trigger. So good pressure, tight pressure in the pinky, a little bit less in the ring finger, and I'm trying to minimize it as much as possible with my middle finger. Next, we have leverage. So the leverage that we build, right, after we have good friction, good pressure into the pinky and into the front of the grip, now we build leverage by our wrist angle, right? I want to have a cant in my wrist right here, driving my hand this way, right? Applying that pressure and that leverage to counteract what the gun wants to do in recoil. So I pull with my pinky and I drive the web of my hand up, and now I have a nice cant in my wrist to mitigate recoil. It's the same thing on the gun. I pull back into the front, web of my hand forward. Now I have a proper grip with the primary hand.